Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Bold Business Breakdown. I'm your host, Sebastian Sanchez.
And I'm also your host, Rebecca Nordquist.
If this is your first time listening to us, we're both marketing students here at NMSU, and we both work for the FinTech Lab powered by New Senate Credit Union.
That's right, and today we have another very, very exciting episode for you. We're bringing on Emil Barr, who is the CEO and founder of Step Up Social and the co-founder of FlashPass.
Yes, if you're very interested in learning about a young entrepreneur, this episode is definitely for you. Emil will talk about dedicating much of his young adulthood to a thriving business, and it's very much successful.
Yeah, and this is the very perfect place to gain that insight, and we know that we gained a lot of insight, so we hope that this episode helps you be bold and shape the future. So we're here with our guest, Mr. Emil Barr. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to just tell us how you're doing today, what's new?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me. Super excited to be here. You're my last call of the day. I know we rescheduled a few times, but I'm kind of excited because I don't have anything after this. So feel free to, go as long as we want, and just really happy to be. These days, I spend most of my days talking to people in their 40s and 50s, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but glad to be talking to some people my age as well, kind of to close out the day.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving us your time as well. Just to get us started, give the audience a little quick rundown on who you are and what you do. We know your schedule's super busy, so it'd be good to get kind of some insight on what you do in day to day, or just who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am the founder of Step Up Social, which is really an agglomeration of companies. We can sort of talk about that later in the interview. We have a few different divisions, but at our core, about 80% of our business is we're a social media agency. So we're really good at making brands go viral on TikTok, Instagram Reels. I'm sure you guys watch a ton of them, YouTube Shorts, things like that, but that's kind of our specialty. I started the business out of my freshman year college dorm room before TikTok was mainstream. And so just as TikTok sort of exploded, the company exploded from there. Today we work with some of the world's biggest brands. We represent, for example, we do the TikTok marketing for like P&G, Kroger, Deckers Brands, which owns UGG and Hoka, which I'm sure you guys have seen before on TikTok, and companies like that. So it's been definitely a wild ride. This last sort of 2.5 years growing the business. We started as just me as a freshman in college, and right now we're a 30-person team, do a couple $1 million in revenue between the companies, and just excited to be here and share as much as I can, kind of what would be helpful to your audience, as well as just to talk to you guys.
Yeah.
So just a quick follow-up question to go off of that. So you say you're an advocate for like student entrepreneurs, student marketing. So what kind of inspired you to do like Step Up Social?
So the original idea was, so before I wasn't a huge social media person. I didn't have an Instagram. I was like that weird kid in high school that's like, hey, what's your Instagram? And it's like, oh, like, and then I got Snapchat mostly because I wanted to to hang out with people, but I didn't really use it either. Mostly for messaging. I think that TikTok was more a symptom of market opportunity, and that we saw an advantage there, and that no companies were sort of tapping into it. And so everything that we've done has been very business conscious and profit conscious from the beginning, which I think is important, because oftentimes when I see younger entrepreneurs, a lot of times people want to follow their passion as opposed to the money, which again sounds very, I think you should be able to do both, but it's a lot easier to follow the money. And then, if your passion is kite racing, than to buy a kite racer, or a racing crew, than it is to try to start a kite racing business from the ground up if there isn't a ton of market opportunity. So this might be a little bit of a reductive answer or a cynical answer, but typically it was a case of, hey, we saw that maybe there's some money to be made here. We saw it took a risk. And then as TikTok became mainstream and we saw Instagram roll out Reels, which is basically a copycat version of TikTok, and Facebook roll out Reels, we were in a really good position because we were one of the first to really be making this type of content at scale. And so we were really well situated to kind of ride that wave. To answer your question about student entrepreneurship in general, I think that one of the things that I really try to tell, I think that a lot of times college students feel like they have to pursue 10 years in the corporate workplace, or, 20 years in the corporate workplace, or if you don't go to a very particular school, like, I know Stanford's very popular for creating startups and things like that, but that you're limited in some ways, or that, that's not necessarily starting a company isn't necessarily a path for you. So why I really like to hop on podcasts like this and just talk about this is, in general, just I think that as young people, there are things that we're never going to be as good at as people with 20, 30 years of experience. But there are also certain niches and industries where you have a massive advantage as a younger person. TikTok is one of them. Like, we go into meetings and we're like, hey, look, do you want someone that looks like me to run your TikTok, or someone that looks like that? And that will be like a 50-year-old guy, like in a suit and tie. And they're like, yeah, no, so there are spaces, I think, social media, AI now is a big one, but there's a lot of spaces where you naturally have an advantage as a younger person. And I do think there's a lot of money and opportunity to be made as an entrepreneur. And I think that that's not often talked about, in any setting. So I like to try to raise awareness for that whenever possible.
Absolutely, yeah. No, yeah. And just to debrief, thank you for coming on our podcast too. We're excited to have you and excited to talk to you as well. So, just to debrief on that as well. But going off of that, you kind of highlighted some advantages, but also some challenges. But were there any other specific challenges that you maybe navigated along the way throughout your journey so far?
I think in general, whatever you do, we can probably, the short answer is there's too many to encapsulate in a short, like 2 minute satisfying answer for this podcast. I think that in general, starting a business isn't impossible, but it's very painful. And I think that realistically, the two biggest aspects that that I don't necessarily think I'm the smartest person in the room, and definitely, not the most outgoing or anything like that. But I do think that sort of not necessarily even the hardest working, but the two things that you do have to have if you're going to start a business, if you want to scale it to a couple $1 million, get it to the point where you're making millions of dollars a year, is number one, a very high tolerance for risk. Meaning that a lot of times people are very good at starting ideas and going from 0 to 1, but they have a very hard time betting one to get to from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 or 4 to 5. So regularly we were taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in business loans on a personal credit card. People freak out about their student loans, but you're taking out like 300 grand, with Amex to pay off expenses and things like that. And just betting, I think it's very hard psychologically for someone once they have 200, $300,000 in their checking account, for the first time in their life, to be able to bet all of that on growing the business further. So the first piece is, I do think that just having a very high tolerance for risk. And it's not that it didn't weigh on me. Like, it was horrible from a mental health perspective. Like, it's not fun, but I do think that if I wasn't willing to make those decisions, I think we wouldn't have scaled to where we were. We probably would have stayed at $10,000 a month, where the business started. The second is just sort of a high tolerance for risk, and then just the ability to withstand pain, in the sense of it's a lot of work when you start, because you don't have employees, you can't afford employees, you can't afford a team. So as you scale up, a lot of the times it's actually less work, but when you start, it is just the ability to put in those 60, 70-hour work weeks. Kind of deal with the psychological pressure of not having time to work a normal job and the lost income there, and not having as much time to study, and just kind of being able to withstand that amount of sort of just physical exhaustion and then mental exhaustion that's going to come inevitably with starting any business. And even when you start, like, we started a new division here at Step Up now, it's the same. It's obviously less because you've been through it a few times, a little less stressful. You can build up a team. But in general, being a younger person, I think it's especially difficult to start a business because you don't have that corporate network of 10 people you can call up that are going to help you and buy your product, and kind of that base that you can build on.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that too, I mean, we learn a lot from the challenges that you might have faced, but we also learn a lot from the maybe happy and exciting moments too. Were there any super exciting things that that you took away along your journey as well that students can learn from, or young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, that's broad. Again, you guys are, it's fun. I think that at the end of the day, if you're not having fun, or at least enjoying what you're doing, I think it's fit, at the end of the day, I don't mean to sound like a doomsayer. I think that sometimes people think that starting a business is the same amount of work as an internship or a part-time job or even going to school, and it's not. Like, it's an 80-hour to 100-hour week commitment, you know, but it's still fun. Like, it's a lot better than, typically you're going to enjoy it a lot more than working, 2 retail jobs, for example, like the alternative. I think that building something, if it excites you to build something that doesn't exist beforehand from the ground up and kind of see that, that's very empowering. I think building up a team and being able to pay people, we try to overpay everyone at Step Up. That's why people stay, So like we're paying college students $60 an hour part-time, which is crazy. But like most adults don't make that. It's like $180,000 a year annualized. What we see is, so there are a lot of really positives just in terms of creating something out of nothing, but also then being able to hire people, being able to help uplift them, being able to help businesses and help them make more money, and help them reach their goals. There are a lot of positives associated with entrepreneurship. And realistically, a lot of those psychological positives are the reason that most entrepreneurs, I think, stick it out. Because at a certain point, your life isn't that different if you make $10,000 a month or $30,000 a month. Like it really isn't. Like there's not that much you can buy, and the IRS is going to take 60% of what you make anyways. So you're only getting to keep half, anyways, at a certain level. But it is sort of that psychological benefit of being able to build something and sort of create a team and bring together the best people that can be very empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that leads me on to my next question. When it comes to like being young and an entrepreneur, we're always discovering new things, for example, or just new things in our lives that come up. How do you deal with like the fast paced action of the business world? Like, how do you adapt to changes? Maybe like how do you adapt to building a better like risk tolerance, I guess you can say, in entrepreneurship or just
Mhm.
in your position.
I mean, I think that most companies are typically very slow to adapt. I haven't met a company that's very fast in general that's large. So the benefit you have being a smaller business is you can change a lot faster. Like people tell us all the time, what happens if TikTok gets banned? Like, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, we're going to come up with the next thing a lot faster than the agencies that have 200 people, and 7 chains of command and take 3 weeks to make a decision. So it is sort of, there's a lot of benefits in the sense of being a smaller business because you can react a lot faster. And purely, I don't think there's a lot of thought that has to go into it just because by virtue of having a 3-person team, you guys get together, you talk for an hour, you make a decision, this is what you're doing, versus at a large company, if you have a 15-person committee, by the time you get them all on a call, then there's a follow-up call, then they commission a research agency, you're looking at a 3-month timeline for what's like a 30-minute conversation at a startup or a smaller team. So part of it isn't too difficult. The biggest thing is, what I like to think about is we were early with TikTok and social media, and there was people, I don't understand. I don't invest in things. I don't sort of spend money on things I don't understand. I never understood crypto or NFTs. But if you look at the people that made the most money with like cryptocurrency, they were like the first 50 people that like were in there. If you look at the people that are going to make the most money with AI, it's like the first 50, 60 firms that built AI, like ChatGPT made trillion, a couple $100 billion, just from their sales. So it is sort of a matter of, I do try to read up and stay on top of whatever that next big thing is because we've made our money by being one of the first agencies to do TikTok marketing, and that's how we've built up our reputation. So I do try to always keep up with sort of what's next. But in terms of business processes and efficiencies, it's just a matter of, hey, if we see something interesting, let's try it out. Let's have that meeting. Let's make the decision in 30 minutes to try doing something with AI and then go from there, which you don't necessarily get at a larger corporation.
Going off of that, how do you stay on top of? I mean, if you don't mind sharing your tips on that, but um, how? I mean, you don't have to share all the ones if you want to keep some of them secret. But is there anything that helps you stay on top of like the trends and like navigating that, so that people can like even just like like you're right with cryptocurrency, people that invested early on made, I mean, some of them could have been billionaires
Oh
now
yes.
versus like somebody who got on the train way later
Oh
on.
yes.
So, yeah.
So there's sort of two things that I'll do. So at a baseline, I read, this sounds very cliche, but I read the Wall Street Journal cover to cover every morning. Now I actually use the app and I just like read their like top news section. I don't like get the physical paper unless I'm flying somewhere and the hotspot on the plane is weird. Sometimes I'll take one on a flight, but short answer is number one, I'll read about that. The Wall Street Journal in particular tends to be very good on picking up things as they happen. And at the very least, you're not going to be first, but you'll be, if you read it, they're usually some of the first to break the news. And then typically, you sort of have a superpower as a college student where what I would do is you can message pretty much anyone and probably a lot of them will respond and they're willing to hop on a call with you if you're just like, hey, I'm doing a class, paper. So like when crypto was launching, what we did is we messaged people that were working at Binance and like these large cryptocurrency companies and Coinbase. And I said, hey, I'm a college student, I'm writing a paper on cryptocurrency. Can I pick your brain for 15 minutes, and interview them? And that's typically what I like to do is I try to actually talk to someone in that industry, either whoever's pointed out in that article or anyone I can find online, and realistically, if you get in early enough, like now, good luck, talking to Sam Altman at ChatGPT OpenAI. But if you talk to him, 3, 4 years ago, he'd probably take a meeting with a college student. They were like a 7-person team. Like he doesn't care. So it is sort of a chance of after, if something seems interesting, I try to talk to people in that industry. Typically, what I found with crypto and AI, they were just both complicated. And I was like, this is too complicated for me to understand. So I'm not going to play in this space. Like I understood TikTok videos go fast. But smaller opportunities like our grant funding from the state of Ohio and government contracting, that was very similar. I read about it in my local newspaper. I was like, there's this new grant. We reached out to someone that works at the governor's office and we're like, hey, I'm writing a paper about grants. Can you tell me about it? And then they explained it in a very simple way. And I was like, oh, this is a business opportunity we should jump on. And then we sort of spun up the team and kind of jumped on that grant funding. But it is very, I guess the short answer is try to read the news, local, and internet, Wall Street Journal, national. And then if you're interested in something, just talk to someone working in that space for 15 minutes. And then from there, usually, at least I can tell, is this something I understand and I want to get involved in? Or is this something too complicated or just something that doesn't seem scammy? Like it doesn't make sense for me.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
How do you like? I guess something I can ask, something a lot of students might be like scared to even ask or just do. Is it like a problem that comes up a lot? Is just like taking that first step. Like for example, you said like people should be open to just messaging whoever if they have a question for something. But sometimes people are scared to be told no. So what do you say to that? Like, should people not be as scared, or what are some advice you can tell us for that?
It's deep psychology. Oh, yeah, I guess my very short advice is just get over it. People are going to tell you a lot. Realistically, what we do like at Step Up is I'll typically email 100 people a day, to try to generate new business and leads. Before now we have cold callers, but before I make like 30, 40 phone calls a day. You just, most people, business is very much a law of large numbers. Of the 100 people we email per day, you email 100 people a day for 30 days, that's 3,000 people a month. Realistically, usually 2 to 3 people would say yes, but they were saying yes to $10,000 a month deals. So like in a month, you're making $30,000 a month in net profit, closing $360,000 a year. That's a fantastic close rate. That's a growth of, $1 million every 3 months. Like that's fantastic. That's where you want to get. But I think where we see people struggle is people are so struggle, they spend too much time over indexing on who's the right person to reach out to and how do I get them to respond and not enough time just messaging as many people as possible. Because a lot of people are going to say no. Like you've got to get comfortable with ignoring that. It really is just a law of large numbers with pretty much any function of sales or marketing or business is it's very hard not most people will say no to you, but a good business is one that 1 out of 100 people are willing to say yes to, and a bad business is one out of where 1 out of 10,000 people will say no to it. And there's been cases like we've reached out to 10,000 people, and no one said yes. We're like, okay, this isn't a good business idea. Like people don't like this. They don't want to talk about this. But if I reach out to 100 people and one person said, yes, I'll meet with you, we would consider that a massive success at Step Up Social. And we'd be like, hey, this is a really good idea. People seem to really like this. Let's message a couple 100 more. It wouldn't be oh, this is a bad idea because we got 99 no's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess my follow-up question, kind of similar, would it be how do you stay sane? Like like you mentioned like people often CEOs, people who have a business idea, they often have to work 80 hours a week sometimes just to find something like their first yes to 100 no's or 10,000 no's. How do you keep yourself sane, find that
Confident.
balance, that confidence?
Yeah.
Yes.
Throughout that. Well, also too, I mean, going off of that as well, just like we know that the work-life balance is hard to maintain. We've heard that for multiple entrepreneurs,
Yeah,
but
yes.
still just like how do you navigate like the to kind of like maintain that confidence and like mental health and like security through that?
So it's not, I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. And I honestly don't think I'd be working an 80-hour work week if we didn't have all these new divisions that we're starting at the company. But realistically, as you grow, the rule of delegation is usually if someone can do a job 70% as well as you and you can afford it, you should hire someone. So naturally, the most difficult times to start a company is the first year or two, where you're not going to get paid a ton, you're working a ton. Well, that's the case of any early career in your 20s. Like, you're not going to make a ton of money out of college no matter what you do, and you're probably going to be working a ton no matter what you do, just because by virtue of the type of jobs you can apply for and the type of jobs you can get. No one's going to give you, a 30-hour a week job that's fully remote. Like, you're going to have to work pretty hard anyways. So that part hasn't been terrible. Obviously, it's difficult to balance it with school, and we can go into that, but there isn't a super easy way to do it. But in terms of just in general, starting a career, starting a company when you're earlier, the first 2 to 3 years are the hardest. But as long as your business is scalable and sustainable, you should be building a team and you should be hiring people pretty quickly. So we have a 30-person team like at Step Up Social. I'm not doing most of the work. And typically the worst run companies are the ones that where you do see an entrepreneur working 100-hour work weeks, but that's a sign of a defective business. And that's the sign of a business that's very hard to sell. So like our goal is to sell Step Up Social for 20-30 million dollars here in the next 2-3 years, right? When an acquirer, if a larger company is going to buy you for $20 million, they want to make sure that if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, their $20 million investment would still be protected. If you guys were investing in a company, you would want that security as well. So typically, I think that in some ways it's exaggerated and it's glorified how much work you have to do. I think when you start, you have to do everyone's job, but the easiest way to sort of delegate and stay sane is just by hiring good people to do that work. Because number one, you don't have to do it. So it's less hours. You just have to manage them. But number two, you're building a significantly stronger business because if you get sick for 2 weeks, for example, because you get COVID or something, your entire company is not going to collapse in that 2 week period.
Mm. No, yeah, that definitely clears it up because even myself, I'm like, I listen to all these entrepreneurs and like starting a business. It seems like, holy cow, that's just so much to take on. But you're right, hiring the right people definitely and building the right team around your business could be extremely, extremely helpful to delegate that work or make it a little bit less of a load. But going off of that as well, were there any like mentors along the way or books or podcasts that played a significant role in starting your business? Or do you believe that, the mentorship does help a lot in that, in this field particularly?
Oh, absolutely. Mentorship, there was 2 or 3 people that were extremely helpful and realistically, they had all built businesses from zero to, one built a very similar business, a marketing agency, but in the SEO and the search space. So he was an early investor, very helpful. We didn't know anything about building a marketing agency. So having someone that literally did it, got from 0 to 10 million in 3 years, like that was fantastic. And then I was also fortunate enough to have one mentor who was a billionaire and the other mentor who had built up one of his companies, fairly younger. I think he was like 29 when we met, and his company was doing $80 million a year. So between the three of them, that was the education all in itself. Like, that's an MBA and a half right there. So that's finding mentors is fantastic. Now, admittedly, that's easier said than done. And I think I was very, very lucky. Like, one, I grew up across the street from the other one, like I met randomly, like at an event, I was like, oh, this is cool. We hit it off. I didn't even know what he did, and then we ended up getting like drinks together and stuff. And then I was like, oh, like you do this, like, I'm looking to start an agency. So some of it was very lucky and fortunate. I realized that it's easier said, oh, just find a billionaire, to mentor you than done. Like that's not super easy to do. But it does come out from reaching out to people. Probably those were 3 success stories. The number of people I met with and got coffee with and asked for advice were probably in the hundreds. The number of people I emailed were in the thousands, but maybe out of the 4,000 people I emailed, 200 said yes. And then 200 coffees or Zoom meetings like this one, maybe 3 of them resulted in those really deep relationships where you learn a ton. So it is also, again, there are things you can do to set yourself up for success and be way more likely to find those people that are willing to kind of mentor you. In terms of books and just general sort of podcasts and business knowledge, I don't have too much. It sounds sort of silly. I loved reading kind of going into this, but I've gotten just so busy with actually running the business that I rarely had time to sort of crack open a book. It was sort of building out that actual human sort of like mentor network and in-person network. But again, um, New Mexico isn't a huge state. Like realistically, you guys probably don't have a massive amount of, people that run $100 million businesses, $200 million businesses. Same thing for Ohio. Ohio didn't have like the hundreds of billionaires like, LA or New York. So what you'll find is those people are surprisingly accessible and there's not as many of them. And they probably don't have college students emailing them and saying, hey, I really want to learn from you. Are you open to getting a coffee? As often as you'd think. Maybe for some of these people, I was the first person to ever email them. Some of them, they're like, oh, like once every 4 or 5 years, a college student emails me, but it's not like they're getting hundreds of emails from college students looking to meet. You could already differentiate yourself and set yourself up for success just by sending that email or sort of trying to make that connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, yeah, that definitely does. I mean, even just, we also go off a lot on our podcast or have other people talk about networking, and we've discovered that that's like a huge thing in just the business world, in growing your company or growing your own name or whatever it is. But if you don't mind sharing, are there any like effective things that work for you when it comes to networking, or any further tips with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The first one is scale. I think a lot of people get discouraged. And so actually I've got a lot of thoughts on this. So the first piece is who to reach out to, right? Like if we're thinking about it like a sales funnel, who do you reach out to? And what I did is I said I didn't want to reach out to anyone who I didn't want to be like them when I grew up. And I want to have a plane by the time I'm 25, and I wanted to make sure I had at least $100 million, by the time I was in my 40s, which again sounds a little bit arrogant, depending on how it comes across, but that's just like, hey, this is what I want out of life. Like, I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. Like, I want to run a really large company one day. So instantly, and I made a list of people, hey, who are people in, within driving distance in Ohio? We had two big cities, Cincinnati, Columbus, you guys probably have Albuquerque, and a few other ones, that are within driving distance that have done that. And it was a list of like maybe 400 people that I could find just searching Google, searching LinkedIn, and things like that. So that was the first piece. It was just being very conscious of who I was networking with, because I think a lot of times college students network with people that are like, okay, this guy's, an accounting manager at this firm. And unless you really care about accounting, you're not going to have a lot to talk about. And then it's going to feel awkward. And then you're not going to want to do it again. You're not going to want to meet with them again. So I was like, I'm not really passionate about accounting. What I really, really want to do is build a big business. And I think that helped. The second piece is just being willing to reach out to all of them. Of that initial 400, I think like 6 responded, which was fantastic, and then I reached out to the other, 400 again, like 6 months later, and I got another 3 to 4 responses. But it is reaching out to them, following up to them, but making sure that, hey, I want to get in front of these people because they're really like the people I want to learn from. So that's the first piece. The second piece is really meeting in person and breaking bread if possible, like eating with someone psychologically. Just people treat it very differently from a Zoom call. People get with Zoom meetings all the time, but oftentimes if you can meet with them in person and go out to lunch if possible, or coffee's a little bit better. But if possible, if you can go out to lunch with them and you can get them, go out to lunch, make the drive. It doesn't matter if they're 6 hours away, if the guy's a billionaire, or the girl's a billionaire, it's worth meeting them, you can take the drive, budget for the gas. But if you sort of do that kind of set up those types of parameters, you meet with them in person. You're probably one of their only 4 or 5 in-person meetings. You're definitely the only college student they've met with in person that's reached out to them. You're already going to stand out. And then if you're genuinely, from there, it's just kind of like what you guys are doing in terms of asking questions. You're not there to pitch yourself. Most of the time, just ask them a lot of questions that you're genuinely curious about. Like, how did you become a billionaire? I was like my lead in. I was like, how did you become, a millionaire? Like, what'd you do? What does your company do? Just ask them questions the entire time. And after that, typically they'll love you and they'll be willing to stay in touch. They'll be willing to put in job recommendations, offer advice, but it really is a fairly simple system.
No, yeah, it's a really good response. I mean, it has a lot to do, with just finding the right crowd and just finding sticking to what you want to be, My next question is regarding young people and entrepreneurship, because I've noticed a lot of like young entrepreneurs, for example, they have a business idea and they go for it, but they just don't like kind of stick with it sometimes, or sometimes there's just like a blockade in their way. So my question for you, Emil, is what are some like habits or beliefs that like us young people have that kind of might prevent them
Mm-hmm.
from like truly entering that world of entrepreneurship?
So, from what I've seen, is there's sort of different groups that people, entrepreneurs, fall into, why they want to start a business. And there is a certain group that's attracted to the prestige. They want to be a business owner. They consume a lot of, YouTube, Instagram content, stuff like that. They kind of want the status to be able to say that they're a CEO. And in your early 20s, personally, I think that's a really stupid thing to do. Like that's you're CEO, you're not a 20-year-old CEO, like that's not it, stuff like that. Those are the ones that I most often see fail. That I often see they don't fail, they fail, but they don't fail in the same way of, hey, my business is making no money. They fail in the sense of I've been working 3 months on a website, or I've been working on this, but I haven't actually been able to get any traction. What I've seen is the people that start businesses that usually are working part-time jobs and they're financially motivated, and they're like, hey, I either need to find a way to pay for, my school, or they're like, look, I've got to find a way, but I know that I got to make money, so I have only a certain number of hours to work on this per week before I make money. Those people typically I've seen succeed or get feedback much faster, and that's because they're trying to actually build businesses that solve a problem. So the biggest thing I'd encourage for entrepreneurs is until you have people that are willing to pay you money for your service or what you're doing, you're not an entrepreneur. You're not a business owner. You have an idea, and it's usually that's it. Like, and I have ideas every day. Everyone has ideas every day. That doesn't differentiate you from anyone else out there. What I would say is make the difficult conversations, ask people to give you money, and either you're going to start making some money and you're going to be like, oh, this is really good. And your next steps are going to be very clear from there and you're going to know what to do next. Or you're going to run into an issue if everyone says no, and then it wasn't a great business idea and you should go back to the drawing board and think of something else. But too often, I see that most people, especially younger entrepreneurs, are hung up on that first step of actually making money from their business and profitability. And that's oftentimes they don't really, they're just sort of like in this weird limbo state where they're working on their website for months or they're like, we're spinning up their business. At Step Up, we ask 1,000 people whenever we're stress testing a new business idea. We ask 1,000 people. If 10 people are willing to pay for it, that's an idea we pursue and we spend more time doing. If they aren't, we move on and move on to the next thing. That can be done in 3 days. But I also know people that have been working on a company for a year that haven't actually asked 1,000 people to get paid for it. So it all is a sort of all about that timeline of, is this a company that's going to make money? And what's sort of standing in your way? Because if it's a profitable business, then you're going to want to work on it to make more money. If it's not a super profitable business and it's a passion project, just be honest with yourself and be like, hey, this isn't really a business yet because we're not making any money. This is a hobby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that definitely, yeah, it's about the effort that you put in and how passionate you are, but like that drive can really grow your business more so.
I certainly, I think it's a lot of the times maybe like people like our age, we see the end product and we chase the end product rather than like the process, like the little things that get in the way.
Into it,
Because we're just like in our eyes, we're just like, oh, I'll make a bunch of money, I'm gonna be rich, I'll be here with my own island. But they don't like what does it take to get there, Like what do you gotta do? What's the problem you gotta solve?
The fundamental piece there is just getting people to give you a check. And that's oftentimes where we see people that get stuck or people that haven't gotten a check yet. And I would encourage people to stress test your assumption as soon as possible. Like if you have a business idea, try to get in front of a couple hundred people as soon as possible and try to sell it. And if people aren't willing to give you money and people will be like, oh, like my idea is super complicated, I have to create a product in China, and get it shipped here, and that's going to take 6 months. Okay, cool. Get pre-orders. Offer them a 50% discount to give a pre-order, get 10, get a couple $100s in pre-orders. Like there's all sorts of ways to test if people are willing to buy your product. But the fastest way that you can build a business is once you start making money, now you have money to invest in other things and scaling up your operations. You have finances, you can spend more time on it because you don't have to work a part-time job or other things, like you can start supplementing your income. But the biggest step that I see entrepreneurs take sometimes months to take, which can be taken in literally the first few days of validating a business idea, is this a problem someone is willing to give you cash to solve?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we mentioned resources, like for example, just to give the audience like an idea, some resources can be like pitch competitions or even going up to a panel of investors and just investing. I guess my question to you as well, now we're here, have you ever been in a pitch competition? Yeah. You've participated in some competitions for money.
Been a few. I've been on both sides of the table, pitching and then evaluating. It's fun. It's always a good time. I think it's great to get some market validation.
No,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is there any advice that you would give? Because we were actually having a pitch competition this semester.
Yes.
So is there any advice that you give as the person that's been on the panel side
Mhm.
specifically?
So the first thing that I'll preface this with is pitch competitions are great testing grounds for public speakers and ideas. I have seen businesses lose pitch competitions that have gone on, one that went on to make $80 million a year, and I have seen countless businesses win pitch competitions that have gone on to make nothing or never got off the ground. So I will preface it with that is again, the most important thing for an entrepreneur is, are you making money? And that's kind of where when I've been on panels, that's what I've always tried to be the voice of. What I'll say is your typical pitch competition judge, a lot of times people care more about emotion and delivery than they do your actual product. So you can have the smartest, most researched product, on the planet and really solve a niche, but people don't buy based off of intellect. People buy based off of pain. So if you can really articulate the problem for your judges and make them feel the pain and how you solve it, the rest of it doesn't matter that much. Meaning that if your college campus doesn't have toilet paper and you can very clearly articulate, hey, I'm going to create a vending machine for toilet paper because otherwise you will shit your pants, and play that visual, that business is going to win the app that's going to help you aggregate your music collection across Apple Music and Spotify no matter what, just because the judges pitch competitions naturally get sensationalized. So the biggest thing I can say is try not to be too formal or analytical. It's more about if you can make the judges sympathize with the problem that your product solves. Oftentimes those are the types of ideas that win pitch competitions because the judge isn't an expert in your space. They don't know a ton about music rights or toilet paper. They're not going to ask you what's the per royalty cost or, how are you bulk delivering toilet paper in storage conditions. They're just going to think, yeah, it's kind of annoying when my Spotify and Apple Music don't line up, but I would really hate to poop my pants, let me make sure that I get. I would rather pick the business that seems like they're solving the bigger problem here.
No, yeah. Thank you for saying that because in the past we've held pitch competitions and the people who don't win, they don't really they don't feel inspired anymore because they don't win. They're like, oh, my idea didn't win. But we always try to tell them it's like this is not the end. This is only the first of all, it's only an idea pitch competition most of the time. So it's just an idea. You work on your idea and you just continue it. And I mean then you kind of just backed it up saying like it's like these you've gone on to seeing people who've lost but they've made a lot of money and the other way around. So yeah, thank you for telling us. Yeah,
that was really helpful.
Pitch competitions are 90% based off of emotion and how you make the judges feel, and not necessarily on the value of the product, for better or for worse. Like, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing, and that's not all pitch competitions, but usually just the nature of having a ton of people competing each other in a room, you have to differentiate yourself. You have judges that like to get into it. You have a wide range of judges, so they're not super narrow and focused on one thing. A lot of different opinions and perspectives and stuff like that. A lot of the times it's more about the emotion behind the problem and the product versus just the elegancy of the solution. So I guess if I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be if you're pitching to investors or judges, because this is the same when you're raising money. Like, we had to raise $200,000 to get the idea from, up and running and off the ground is, well, not up and running. We were making money, but to scale it, we were doing like $20,000 a month and we had to get to $200,000 a month and we needed $200,000 to hire some full-time people and stuff like that. Same thing. Like I raised from lawyers. I raised from a guy that had a logistics company, like a trucking company. They knew nothing about TikTok, but it's less about the solution and more about, do they understand the problem? And our problem was, hey, brands that don't post on TikTok absolutely are getting hammered by Gen Z. They just suck at reaching younger customers. And they understood that. They're like, oh, this is the company. Half of them didn't even know what we were doing. I don't think some of them know what TikTok is, but they're like, oh, you're the company that helps like companies reach younger customers. I'm like, yeah, that's what we do, So it is sort of about articulating that problem as much as possible.
But yeah, it's interesting to know that, because I think especially for people who are on the side of pitching their ideas, hearing this perspective from somebody who has a great idea and like scaled a business as successful as yours, and somebody who judged on the panel, I think that is really helpful for those students to hear that, because I think a lot of the time that's not what they're hearing. They're kind of in for a surprise. They're like, I'm going to pitch.
Yeah,
They don't really know the panel's opinion. So that's super cool and really, really helpful for them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, especially like a lot of business students, they have an idea, they want to be motivated, but they just don't know what to do, you know? And that's what halts them in the first place, is just trying to find that idea. But at the end of the day, you know, even the simplest ideas can make you a lot of money, you know? And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I mean, we're still young, you know, we have so much years to just plan something. So there's where we shouldn't be scared to take risks, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. But
we did have a game as well. Those were our questions. We were going to ask you your final thoughts after the game, but it's just like a little we're like going to do like logos and show you them and see if you can tell us if you recognize them.
yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you want to show off your
I'll
first
go
one?
first. Okay.
So we each have 3 logos.
Yeah, so we each have 3 logos. Just they don't have their names in it, so you just gotta try to see if you can recognize their iconic logo. You know, there's a whole thing on marketing and making the most influential logo, you know, some companies. But for my first one, I don't know. I'll just have to show you on the screen. This is my first one. I don't know if you can name that.
Yeah, it's Rolex.
Oh, he has a Rolex on. Okay, yeah. That's correct.
And
Rebecca.
Ooh,
Bank of America.
Bank of
Yes.
America.
They were one of our first places we banked with.
For our next logo, here's one that's kind of big right now. You know, who doesn't recognize?
I think that's Robin Hood, right?
Correct. Robin Hood, you know, for investing stocks, and a lot of young people love to use it.
yes. It is big. It's a new fintech.
New fintech.
This one's not, but yeah.
That is Unilever, right?
Yep.
That's a hard one. I'll say right off the bat, that's one I never really recognized, because I don't.
I work in marketing, so it's also
Yeah, I should recognize it. Yeah. So for my next one, my last one, this is kind of a new app that's kind of up and coming into, you can call it in a way kind of like a marketing app, but it's big. It's big right now with young people right now, and I don't know if you've ever seen this app. It's
No.
I'm completely stumped.
I think it's an up and coming app.
Yeah, it's very, very new.
Mm-hmm.
And like people have to like invite you to it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
we're
like
not
very
we're not
exclusive.
sponsored by them. We're just, well, maybe you might recognize it. But
It's Laps.
It's Laps.
Laps. Here, we should do a email campaign about that.
We can send you an invite as well if you want to join.
Perfect.
All right. And then this is our next one.
Our last one.
You guys are saved the hardest ones for last, huh? Is that Levi jeans?
Yep. Yes.
Either
You're
that
right.
or, yeah. Iconic red.
Wow, you did really, really good.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
really good.
Laps is so new. It's like a very new thing. So
I got that one to purposely trip you up, you know.
Yeah.
You
we had assumed that you probably knew all of them.
yeah.
But
yeah,
that's
what was that?
What was that?
You succeeded.
Yes,
Yes,
you
you
succeeded.
So
that was the last of the game. That was the last of our questions. But are there any final thoughts that you have, or anything that you want to add?
Nothing crazy. This was fantastic. Thank you guys for having me on. As I said, always fun to talk to other college students and people building things, and hope to, this isn't the last conversation and we get a chance to get together again soon.
Absolutely,
of
yeah.
course, yeah.
We definitely hope that you come to the school sometime soon as well. We will definitely be there to hear it again.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're interested on the podcast again, let us know. This was really helpful, and thank you for your time.
Fantastic. Good luck with the start of school tomorrow, guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you
and
too.
You as well. When school starts, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for your time, and we hope that this information helps you students be bold and shape the future.
Oh, hey, fancy seeing you here. Hope you make it to our next episode.